All right, thank you so much for joining on in today. It's a couple minutes past. We might kick off if we can. So first of all, we'd like to acknowledge country. Alex, if you can change the slide, that'd be great. Just going to acknowledge country for this meeting today. We've got members coming in across the state here in Queensland, and we'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and the land at which we're meeting on, and the traditional custodians across Queensland and their connections to land, sea, community. And we pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and members who have joined us today. So my name's Billy. I am your organiser for TAFE, and I just wanted to spend a quick second to introduce myself, but also welcome you all along to the meeting today. In a second, we're going to hear from Alex Scott, your union's branch secretary, in regards to a Charter of Workers' Rights and an opportunity for you to strengthen your rights at TAFE from every single campus across Queensland. Really important time to come together, and I just want to acknowledge absolute thank you and congratulations for every single one of you for taking some time today to jump in and join on. You've got text messages from me over the past couple of days. If you want to reach out, have a coffee or catch up, please don't hesitate to reach out and do so. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Alex Scott, and you can at any point ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A function. If we don't get to all the questions today, we'll come back to you. So over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Billy. In terms of today, we wanted to start the briefing process for members in relation to what's happening around the possibility of a Charter of Workers' Rights, particularly across the public sector, and what that might mean for members in TAFE Queensland. And one of the key issues we've seen over the last couple of years is we've been able to use the strength of our broader membership to demand a rewrite of the Public Service Act. And so public servants across Queensland have campaigned last year and the year before to try and improve their working conditions through the legislation. So we have, year after year, we've been involved in collective bargaining processes, both in the core and across the public sector. But members in the public service saw that there were key issues in relation to their employment that they wanted to have changed, and the only way that they could change those is through legislation. And so a number of significant improvements that have occurred are a result of that continuing campaign from the public service membership within Together, particularly in relation to some of the improvements around conversion of temporaries to permanent, in relation to rights, in relation to long-term hire duties being able to be converted to their long-term positions rather than potentially having their employment, their classification levels drop at a week's notice. So as part of that process, that has been ongoing for 3 years now, and the union was also able to campaign in the lead up to the state election to try and get some commitments about the continuation of that process. And what that process now looks like is that the state government has committed in relation to this process to not only amend the Public Service Act, but to fundamentally rewrite it. And that is going to be very significant for our members within the public service. But in addition to the broader conversation that we're having with government in negotiations, has not just at the moment been around how we can improve workers' rights for the public service. We've been able to start a conversation with the government about why public sector workers should be disenfranchised compared to public servants. So as TAFE employees, over a decade ago, TAFE employees were public servants as well. And TAFE employees, whether in the educational staff or in terms of the support staff and the administrative staff, those people were always public servants until TAFE Queensland was created. When the legislation to create TAFE Queensland was created, the last iteration of it, that legislation was passed in a way that excluded TAFE from the Public Service Act. So not only were you no longer public servants if you were at the time, but also that the provisions in relation to the Public Service Act, as it provides for a range of guarantees and a range of guarantees about how the employer must treat employees, TAFE was specifically excluded from the provisions of the Public Service Act. And what that has meant is that where we have had significant improvements at a sector-wide level in relation to the employment security issues around temporary conversion and permanency. What we saw was we then had to renegotiate that with TAFE, and TAFE was able to say yes or no to that process. And so we weren't automatically able to get those outcomes. We had to have a separate series of negotiations with TAFE, and they were able to opt in or opt out of whether they would pick up what was becoming general standard conditions across the public service. So what we've been seeking to do in the rewrite of the legislation is to change the nature of the legislation. And while it's called the Public Service Act, there are some parts of the public sector who get roped into it. So Health Queensland, in terms of the HHSs are the largest employer in the state, they're not public servants, but large parts of the Public Service Act are covered, they're covered by the Public Service Commission directives and by a range of other activities. And in addition to that, there are a number of statutory authorities are also in a kind of halfway phase, that they're not public servants, but parts of the Public Service Act or parts of the Public Service Commission directives apply to them. And what we've been seeking to do as part of the rewrite of the Public Service Act is to have that conversation broadened out. And in conversation with Billy and Bohim Danny, we've been working through what is the way that we can try and ensure that workers within TAFE have the same working conditions and the same rights at work that other parts of the public sector would have and that public servants have. And this is just about the legislation. There are a range of your conditions, such as your wages, your hours of work. Those things are contained within your collective bargaining arrangements or within your awards. But there is still a significant component about how you are treated at work, which is contained within legislation for public servants and not contained within legislation as it relates to TAFE employees. So in terms of this process, what we're looking at trying to do is think about, is there a support from TAFE workers to adopt the kind of Charter of Workers' Rights that we are looking to campaign around for public servants? Are TAFE workers interested in having a conversation about trying to see whether the legislation should be extended to cover public servants, to cover TAFE employees? What this campaign won't result in is, in terms of this process, it wouldn't result in you becoming public servants again. We think that in terms of the ability of government to accept the argument around about TAFE becoming public servants, that wouldn't be the outcome of this campaign, because there are a large number of public sector work units, including TAFE, who don't get currently caught by the Courier Mail test in relation to the number of public servants. So in terms of that, we think the actual becoming a public servant is unlikely out of this. But what we can achieve, we think, if we have enough support from workers to force the politicians to adopt the Charter of Workers' Rights, is for an extension process that would allow for all the rights and entitlements you would have as public servants to apply to you as TAFE employees. And there are a variety of these issues, and this list isn't complete, and this list isn't also finalised, because as part of this campaign, we're seeking to improve these rights for public servants. But we're also wanting to have a conversation about whether we can have the ability to put enough industrial pressure and political pressure on the state government to extend the rights, not just to public servants, but to public sector workers. So the sort of things that are included in this regard are in relation to things like discipline processes, in relation to appeal rights. And certainly at the moment, public servants have had some big wins over the last couple of years in getting access to appeal rights, but also getting access to appeal rights into the Industrial Relations Commission rather than the Public Service Commission. So fair treatment, conversion rights, discipline rights, a range of those things have substantially improved over the last couple of years because of that broader campaign. But also issues in relation to things like how senior management are treated for senior officers and SOs, in relation to how performance management occurs, in relation to public sector workers, particularly in relation to the union campaign strongly to get a barrister called Peter Bridgman to undertake a review of the Public Service Act, which was really the starting platform for this campaign. And that's really changed the definition and framework for performance management within the public sector or in the public service to being around a positive performance management process, which is quite different to the industrial standard. And that really has been something that we're still starting to see come through better. And also in relation to a variety of other issues, particularly about putting legislative limitations and frameworks around how management behave. So the award and the EB cover how you should be paid and your one level of entitlements. But the sort of rights that we're talking about trying to improve in terms of TAFE, there is very limited information in your Act about how management has to employ you. They say you are employed under the Act, and that is the legal head of power, which provides for TAFE employees to be paid out of government money. But beyond that, the amount of detail about how you are treated and how the employer can treat you under legislation is almost zero. So you rely basically on what's in the Industrial Relations Act and nothing more. Other parts of the public sector, whether it's health workers or public servants, have much more details in the legislation around what the employer can do and how they should do it, particularly in relation to the treatment of staff, fair treatment, discipline, performance management, conversion rights. There's a raft of those issues which are caught by legislation, and there's another raft of concurrent issues which are caught by Public Service Commission directives that would have applied to you if you were an employee of TAFE prior, and as a public servant prior to the legislative change about a decade ago. So in terms of that process, they're the sort of issues that we think are significant and are capable of being addressed. What we're seeing across the public service is a very significant campaign in this regard. The members in the public service are seeing not only the wins that they had over the last couple of years, but they're also seeing the potential for significant improvements in the employer's behaviour as governed by legislation over the next 12 months. And as part of this, we know that there will be legislation being tabled by the end of this year. In terms of the state election, we were lobbying the government to try and get commitments about what they would do if they got re-elected. And one of the commitments we got from the ALP in the lead up to the state election was that they would rewrite the Public Service Act in full, which was previous policy but hadn't been implemented. But that would also happen within the first 12 months of a Palaszczuk government being re-elected. So there is a time frame on this that we know that that we've been working closely with the Premier's Department and with the Public Service Commission. We think that in terms of this process, that's on track. That is likely to then kind of within the machinery of government escalates to decisions by Cabinet to start the process formally. And in the second round of the process formally, and that would then be scheduled to then have draft legislation being tabled in the Parliament in late November, probably, for consideration in relation to being adopted passed by Parliament in the first couple of months of next year. Those timeframes were then committed to by the ALP and have now been adopted as government policy, and that is the projections in terms of the timeframes of this campaign. We chose to put the pressure on the government in relation to the timing in particular, because we wanted to make sure that we got that timing in place before a range of public sector bargains occur next year. Because of the wages deferral, we have a significant number of bargains occurring between April next year and September next year, and we wanted to have the legislative discussion with government prior to the bargaining around wages and other kind of hours of work and those sort of things that will happen in the second round of in the public sector bargaining kind of processes next year. So the timeframes are, we're confident on those timeframes. We're reasonably, nothing within government is certain, but I'm confident that legislation that the cabinet process will happen over the next couple of months, which will then mean that the legislation would be subject to drafting and then be tabled by November and then considered by Parliament in February. And that's where the public service membership is at in terms of developing up enough industrial and political momentum to make sure the legislation gets drafted, tabled and then passed, but what we've also been able to do in the broader campaign is to be making sure that at each stage of those, the draft legislation improves and improves and improves, and we end up with significant outcomes as part of that. And what we certainly have learnt over the last couple of years has been the ability of public servants to convert that political and industrial pressure has resulted in better legislation than otherwise would have been the case. And in terms of that, though, the commitment from the government was also that we then should have that conversation around, is the Public Service Act just for public servants? And is there the ability to have a series of, effectively a charter of workers' rights contained in the Public Service Act, but apply to public sector workers who would be otherwise outside of the Act? There'll be some people in the public sector who can't achieve this, particularly in relation to government-owned corporations who are covered by the Fair Work jurisdiction. They wouldn't be able to be caught by this legislation for a variety of industrial means. But there is a large number of public sector units who are public sector, covered by state awards, covered by state enterprise bargaining arrangements, but not currently caught by the Public Service Act and not currently caught by the provisions of the Public Service Commission and their associated directives. And what we'll be looking at doing as part of this is having a conversation with people such as yourselves, but also with a number of other statutory authorities and other parts of the public sector about, is this something that the workers are interested in? Is there an appetite for public sector workers, not public servants, but public sector workers, to try and be covered by the same rights and entitlements that public servants enjoy? And that public servants have won through this campaign. And if workers within TAFE and if workers within these other statutory authorities think this is something that is worth pursuing, we want to then be in a position that we can then use the success of the public service campaign to be leveraged to ensure that we can drive the legislation beyond just the public service into the public sector. I think TAFE in that is going to be critical. I think in terms of, we've had a strong response to the initial material that Billy's been putting out. I think we are going to have a unique opportunity over the next 6 months to work out how TAFE workers are treated beyond the bargaining frame in relation to and whether we're able to raise your rights to the same level as public servants during this process. But at the end of the day, this will be a political and industrial decision by government about whether they can effectively be bothered to make a change. We know that TAFE management will certainly be opposed to this. We think that certainly in terms of, as with any employer, they would like to have a completely free hand in relation to how they treat staff. That's why we collectively bargain with them, to make sure they don't have a free hand to work out what they pay staff. This is really a natural extension of that, and then saying, do we want to try and regulate the way our employer behaves? And in terms of that, if that is of something that is of enough interest to enough members in TAFE and other workers in TAFE, I am confident that we can use this unique opportunity in terms of timeframes to put together a pressure process, both industrial and political, with the state government to try and say, yes, they should extend public service rights, the Charter of Workers' Rights in relation to TAFE workers. We'll be talking to WorkCover as well. We'll be talking to a range of statutory authorities. And in terms of that, it's really going to be down to the capacity of workers in each authority and each employer to work out whether they have enough interest in the campaign to put enough political and industrial pressure against the government. This isn't going to be about strike action. This isn't going to be about the sort of protected action processes we sometimes undertake in terms of improving wages and through collective bargaining. But if this campaign is going to be successful, we need to make it clear to government that it's better for them to say yes to this campaign than to continue to oppose it and continue to treat TAFE as second-class citizens compared to the public service. And that really will be decided by people such as yourselves and other employees in TAFE as to whether they want to get involved or not. It's going to be the level to which TAFE workers are able to be collectivised and in terms of that process are willing to kind of get involved, make their voice heard and demand a better outcome from both at a political level and at an industrial level. So it then becomes a process whereby as the public service achieves greater outcomes later in the year, the question is whether we can get enough momentum and enough support amongst TAFE workers to make sure that the TAFE is part of that conversation rather than excluded from that conversation. So I'm confident from the Together perspective, Together Office perspective, we know that we will be able to achieve a lot for public servants this year. We know that we'll be able to achieve that through a specific time frame, likely to be November with possible legislation being tabled in November for a vote in February. We've done this several times over the last few years and we know what that looks like, and we have a strong enough membership structure who are active around these issues to make sure that we can put enough pressure on the politicians, the ministers, the backbenchers and senior government officials to make that change a reality. And having spoken to a range of statutory authorities, I know there's already strong interest in this in a range of other statutory authorities. I think the question now over the next short period is going to be about whether or not there is interest from TAFE workers to be part of this process, and whether TAFE workers and TAFE members want to be part of a real change and take advantage of this opportunity. Because I think the challenge that we have in this process is that the ability to win this as a one-off for TAFE, I think, is substantially difficult, and we haven't been able to win that over the last few years when we've talked about public service status and a range of issues, because TAFE hasn't had that enough strength to win that argument alone. But by combining it with the public service campaign, we know that public service is going to be strong. We know that our membership and our delegate structures across the public service have already won on lots of this already, and that's just kind of round 4 for them in terms of this legislative campaign. But now that window has now been opened, and now we've got an opportunity with the way that we were able to get the commitments from the government before the last election, there is now an opportunity. The conversation isn't just about public servants, but it is about the public sector. It is about a charter of rights for the public sector that can make a real difference to the way that staff are treated. The question is about, from TAFE's point of view, whether members in TAFE and workers in TAFE want to be part of this. If you're happy having kind of a different set of conditions in terms of rights and appeal rights and guarantees around discipline and performance management and those things, and conversion rights, if you're happy for those things to be purely at the whim of the employer, the status quo will remain. If you want to make a real change, if you want to be part of a process for change, I think this is the opportunity to do it. It's much easier to win this year than it has been previously because of the public service campaign structure. And in terms of that, but we'll be working with a range of statutory authorities in this area and members in those areas and delegates in those areas. And I've already spoken to a bunch of those people about how they're going to get involved and what they want to do to make a difference in their working lives, their members' working lives. But today is really the start of that conversation for members in TAFE to work that through. So I might hand over to Billy to talk through what it might look like to try and have this campaign, but also if there is interest from members about where we go to next.
Great, thanks Alex, and keep popping the questions through, everyone, if you get a chance, and we'll have a bit of a moment to get back to those afterwards if not. So Alex said quite clearly that it's really up to TAFE members where we go next and what happens next. So the steps in the next couple of weeks that we're going to go through and you're going to go through as union members, the first one's going to be starting to raise some awareness. As you can see on the screen there, what we really need to start doing is raising awareness. We've got a question from Catherine that's come through up in Townsville. It is around, we're not the only union in TAFE, that the educators, some of them might be joining the QTU, even though we've also, as a union, look after our educators as well. Absolutely good point, Catherine. This will impact absolutely everyone who works at TAFE. So Together members are going to be leading from the front in this campaign to make sure that the government not only understands that you care about it, if you do, and the next point on that is that your colleagues know that you're leading from the front to make their working life better as well. So After this meeting, we're going to pop out an email to all TAFE members and everyone who's RSVP'd to attend this with a copy of 2 posters. You can see them on the screen. What we want to start to do is build a bit of that public awareness and that awareness within your local workplace. So if you get a moment, print that out, send a photo of you holding it up back to the union office, and we'll start putting those together and collating them. The other thing is asking your colleagues who aren't yet union members to join to secure better working rights with you. It's going to take a group of people to make sure the government takes TAFE workers seriously if this is where you'd like to go. And so it's going to take an active, strong union membership to ensure that happens. Things don't just happen because the government comes down or TAFE comes down and goes, here's some great things we're going to do for you. It takes people like you standing together every single day to ensure that your rights at work get better. So the next point after this, and coming forward to next week, we're going to pop a ballot out of all TAFE members to ask if they can endorse the Charter of Workers' Rights. Union members make decisions, so we're going to spend a bit more time talking about what the Charter has in it. More than happy to have meetings with anyone who'd like to, or have a chat to your delegates because they'll have a copy and be briefed on this as well. So first 2 actions from today. Ask a colleague to join your union with you so they can secure better working rights. And the other ask is to make sure when you get those posters, you print them out, you take a photo with your team or with yourself, you put them up and you send the photo back to us so that we can start to build the real faces of why a Charter of Workers' Rights at TAFE is important. Without you, and as Alex said before, you're our secret weapon to ensuring that your conditions get better. Without you and your colleagues getting active, I'm going to ask the very broad question now, what do you think will change? Usually, in my experience, without union members getting active, getting involved, and making sure that they're setting the direction of their future, TAFE gets everything they want and nothing else changes. So you really have to get involved. That's really what we're looking at today. Now, there's been no other questions come through, Alex, in the chat, and it is 2 minutes off. So if there are any further questions coming through, pop them through and we'll be able to go through from there. Tracy, yes, we will be emailing out the Charters of Workers' Rights once we've got it finalised, and you'll be able to have a read over it and discuss it a bit further.
I think we'd also want to try and get some indication from members today as to whether they'd be supportive of this campaign. In terms of that process, what we'll be asking people if they've got the capacity on them on their technology to give us some indication as to whether or not that process. So in terms of that process, this will give us, because what we know is the only way we're going to win this if we have enough people supporting it. So if you are willing to be part of this campaign, if you could participate in the poll, and that really gives us the ability to go out and work through the fact that we will be able to ensure that we have enough strength to win this. Because as Billy said and I said before, we are confident that there will be a new Public Service Act by this time next year. We're confident there will be a conversation about whether that should be a Public Service Act or a Public Sector Act. I think the real challenge is going to be about whether we have enough interest from workers within TAFE to make real change within TAFE a reality, or whether TAFE will be watching from the sidelines as other parts of the public service and the public sector get real and significant outcomes out of this process. So we'll leave that poll open for a little while, just because it's important for us to understand exactly what level of support this is, because Billy and I can't win this campaign. Only members can win this campaign, and the only way the members will win this campaign is if you get involved, get active, and make sure that you can make a real difference, because at the end of the day, politicians listen to the large numbers of people who vote for them and are employed by them. We know that works. We've been able to show that in the past. Our challenge now is to see from TAFE's point of view, is there something that you will be involved with? If we get good outcomes out of this today and you stay involved, and if you continue to build that pressure, I'm really confident we can make really fundamental change within TAFE over the next 6 months. I think it's long overdue, but no matter how passionate Billy and I are about this, it really is going to be a matter of you will make a difference in your workplace if you're part of the campaign. If we don't get enough support in terms of this process or enough involvement from members, I think we'll be, unfortunately, unable to get the sort of outcomes that I think which are within reach this year.
Alex, I can say that 72% of people have voted already in the poll. So if you have a chance, jump in there and vote. I also want to say congratulations to the 5 people that have joined or have committed to joining their union today at the meeting. And congratulations to every member who brought a colleague along to the meeting as well. So that's 5 new members potentially today as well. So congratulations, everyone.
And the final, we probably call it a meeting closed in a minute, but I think we'll be also sending out an email just to ask people how they felt today went, because we are trying to build our strength as a union. We think that these sort of webinars are an important process in terms of being able to build the strength across the state, particularly given the nature of TAFE. It's worked well for us in other areas, but we're also keen to get your feedback about how you felt today went and what are the other opportunities we could have in terms of trying to continue to engage with workers as much as possible. So therefore, there is as much opportunity for you to make a difference to your working lives over the next 6 to 12 months. So I think at this stage, Billy, unless there's other questions we need to cover off.
Absolutely not. I think we've got to everyone. Congratulations, everyone, for joining the meeting today. It's been great having you online.
Thanks, everybody, for your time.